The two rock stars had never met before. Jagger was 5 months older than Jim and had been a star 3 years longer. Jim stood up and shook Mick's hand, then retired to the bed, resting for the evening's Hollywood Bowl show. Mick asked Jim if he meditated before a show. Jim looked at Mick as if he were insane. Meditate? No, man. We leave that up to John and Robby. Mick wanted to talk about stagecraft, and he said he wanted to learn how to work a big crowd. He told Jim the Stones hadn't played anywhere in 15 months and were really rusty. Jim asked Mick about Brian Jones. Brian Jones and Jim Morrison both having had relationships with the singer Nico. Mick rolled his eyes and said Brian was having a hard time. He lost his woman to Keith a year earlier. Mick said he thought Brian was in Morocco taping the music of a tribe up in the mountains, a group of musicians who were also magicians. Brian Geisen, a friend of William Burroughs, had told Brian about them. You know William? Mick asked. Jim shook his head no. Jansen later recalled. They talked about dancing on stage. Mick said he was embarrassed about his dancing. He said the one thing he couldn't do was dance. And he and Jim commiserated that it was increasingly difficult to feel comfortable and to feel smooth dancing on stage. The larger the audiences got, the larger the working area was, and the less you could relate to it. Everything had to be more exaggerated. Jim told Mick, if you fall, man, you really gotta fall. They laughed together at how everything was overblown. They had grown up with the movie stars and cowboy heroes and everything, and then all of a sudden they were the center stage. They were both kind of boyishly bashful about it, and yet in full command. And it was very evident that they had mutual respect for each other's talent. There have been claims that Mick gave Jim some LSD-25, which Jagger had gotten from an LA friend the day before, and that Jim popped the tabs right after Mick left the motel. After Jagger left, Jim called Pamela Courson to tell her about the visit and asked her to pick him up and drive him to the show. She had sent him a beautiful midnight blue vest, intricately embroidered with gold thread, which she had brought back from the souks of Marrakech. She told him to forget it because she had company. She told him that he should quit the Doors and be a poet. She'd been telling him this for months now. Pam hated the Doors, thought the whole thing was way beneath his talents, and anyways, it was killing him. Jim didn't argue with her, just reminded her that the Doors were paying the bills for her rent, the boutique, and everything else. Pam told Jim that she would be at the concert and that her new fling Christopher Jones was coming along. The Hollywood Bowl was built in 1922 as a spectacular amphitheater seating 18,000 people, dramatically situated in the hills above the city. It was an ideal evening venue for the Los Angeles Philharmonic and the opera companies it was designed for, but was far more problematic when it came to amplified rock shows. In early July of 1968, the Doors crew arrived 2 days early before their show to set up the gear, 54 amps lined up across 30 yards of the stage, loud enough to be heard a mile away. New Doors crew member Harrison Ford was an aspiring actor. His chores included some carpentry and, according to unsubstantiated Hollywood lore, finding herbs for the band. He also handled one of the cameras during the concert's 4-camera shoot. The show was completely sold out and hotly anticipated in Los Angeles. KHJ radio jocks noted that the crowd was even nuttier than the one the Monkees had drawn a few months earlier. Steppenwolf opened the hot July evening with their new hits Born to be Wild and Magic Carpet Ride. The Chambers Brothers roused the teenagers with their long-form psychedelic jam, Time Has Come Today. Mick Jagger, who had gone to dinner with the Doors before the show, sat backstage and watched carefully how things went. The Doors went on stage around 9 o'clock amid a seething mob scene and turned in a subdued performance that disappointed everyone there that night. The Electric Shaman, the Lizard King, none of these personas showed up. Instead, Jim shocked everyone and sang, crooning his songs in leather trousers and his Moroccan vest, fixed from a spot on the stage, moving very little. He wore a silver cross around his neck, which no one had ever seen him do, and chain-smoked cigarettes, which was also unlike him. Only when he had to scream did he bend at the mic and let go, and occasionally Jim would allow himself to fall into one of his cool, crouching hoppy dances. The other musicians looked at each other in puzzlement as Jim worked through the hits and then into songs from the just-released Waiting for the Sun, 5 to 1, Hello I Love You, Spanish Caravan, and The Unknown Soldier. After every song, hordes of teens yelled at him to do Light My Fire. He slipped 2 sections of Celebration into Horse Latitudes and 3 of his new poems, Accident, Grasshopper, and Ensenada, into the end. Throughout, Jim maintained a vacant stare, smiling a little, not bothering to make contact with the audience. There were several factors involved with this tepid show. Mick Jagger, Marianne Faithfull, and Jimmy Miller were sitting in the front row, so Jim was under Jagger's merciless regard. Pamela and her boyfriend were cuddled up a few rows behind them. The hot movie lights made the Doors' usually dark stage white hot. Jim was obviously uncomfortable with the gigantism of the bowl, and with the immaturity of the restless kids who laughed at the band, threw things, booed the new songs, and ran around during the show. If, as Pam told Jones, Jim was playing high on LSD, he managed quite well, turning in a musically faultless performance that still bored everyone silly. The kids were expecting raw rock theater bordering on human sacrifice, and got a live TV show instead. John Densmore was furious when Robby told him that Jim had dropped a few tabs of LSD before going on. Mick and Marianne skipped the party afterward. Jimmy Miller later said that on the drive back to the hotel, Mick Jagger complained the Doors were boring. The Hollywood Bowl concert had been a financial success, but a major downer. The Doors suffered what writer Ellen Sander, now Jack Holzman's girlfriend, called a dramatic loss of local prestige, as the suburban high school kids badmouthed the band. Mick Jagger had learned how not to put on a big rock concert. Pamela and Christopher Jones went backstage after the show. Jones waited outside while Pam went into the dressing room. Then she stuck her head out the door and motioned Jones inside. When he came in, Jim grabbed Pam and sat her in his lap. He just sat there grinning at me, Jones told writer Patricia Butler, with Pam on his lap, and she was looking at me kind of nervous. But Jim knew about us at that point, and he was trying to get one up on me.